Ohio's public schools are still struggling with a bus driver shortage that's gone on for years. Before the pandemic, Ohio had 25,706 active bus drivers. By August of this year, there were only 18,817 bus drivers employed by schools. Public schools are required by law to transport private school students. More than 66,500 non-public and charter school students were bused by public schools in the 2023-24 school year, which is the most recent data available. Some districts are now running more routes for non-public students than their own students. I talked with Doug Palmer, the former transportation consultant for the Ohio School Boards Association, about how the bus driver shortage started and where schools go from here.
We have an aging population. Females bus drivers average are 56 years old and male bus drivers are 58 years old. That's the average. So how long can someone start? I mean, if that's the average, you're going to have people retire. You have people, and as I get older too, I realize that I don't heal as fast. It takes me longer to get better. I have more things wrong with me. And so you're just not available as much as what you used to be or want to be. And you hit on a really good topic that I don't think anybody's been talking about. It's actually the human cost of transportation. Transportation departments, their management, the school bus drivers, everyone involved in transportation really feels let down that they can't do a better job. I mean, it really, there's a certain amount of burnout that when I can't do my job the way I'm taught, the way I'm trained, the way I want to, it's just really frustrating. And it worries me that people don't have their bus route, their students, their children at the top of mind, right? I mean, they're worried about other things. They're worried about how many drivers are showing up. They're worried about an extra trip in the afternoon. I mean, it's quite consuming for these individuals.
You mentioned the age of bus drivers, the average age of bus drivers is creeping up. What are some of the other reasons why we're in this position? And really, it seemed like it started with COVID, but it didn't start with COVID.
No, it started in 2018. It really started in 2018. That was when uh, more stores started doing home delivery. People that could drive, that want to drive for a living, have other choices now. And so that started to take away from the sub pool, the substitute driver pool that schools normally hired regular drivers out of. That dried up in 2018 and 2019. And in 2020, with everyone now doing home delivery, it just exacerbated this driver shortage because they're I mean, if you can make the same amount of money in 4 or 5 hours in one shift from 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 8 o'clock, why would you want to drive school bus and have start at 6 o'clock in the morning and be committed to an 11-hour day and not get off till 5 o'clock? And so pay being equal, the time frame that people have to invest in that is way less. And while there are many benefits to schools with retirement and dental and vision and insurance that are available, it just doesn't offset people's desire to control their own schedule. I mean, if they don't want to drive on Tuesday afternoon, they just tell Amazon or Kroger or wherever they're driving for, I don't want to drive. And so, they just have more flexibility. I think flexibility is really the driving factor that we can't get past this driver shortage. We can't hire our way out of the driver shortage. Schools are just reducing services, and that's unfortunate for the children.
For the last few years, you've told me the districts have been putting in place all sorts of things to try to fight the shortage. Staff that have commercial driver's licenses have been driving buses. I've spoken to some directly. Some have used hiring bonuses, finding other shifts for drivers to work, restructuring shifts in the administrative offices. Are these efforts just patches, or are they turning into real solutions?
Well, they look like a solution, but then you have a couple of drivers retire. And in our retirement system with school buses and school employees retirement system, you have a full credit 120 days into school. So if you're waiting for your 20th year or your 5th year or your 10th year, and you get to that in January or February, a lot of drivers retire at that time and then schools struggle through the busiest season through spring. And now the management is just absolutely overwhelmed with trying to cover the trips and recruiting and hiring and all of that promoting, all of that goes by the wayside, and then they lose the summer to get people hired and trained, and so it's a vicious cycle.
State law says public school districts have to transport their own students up to eighth grade and private and voucher school students as well. So, what's been the impact of those non public school students?
Well, the impact of the non-public school student is that the school can't control when that building's when that when they want to go to school. And most private and non-public and community schools, they want to start around 8 o'clock. Everybody wants to start around 8 o'clock. Nobody wants to start at 10 o'clock when there's buses available. So there's that time crunch that everybody wants to go at the same time. And also, if you look at traffic, oh my gosh, every morning our buses are operating in the peak traffic flow. So just that alone causes delays and extra time it takes to run routes. And so there's a lot of competing factors for drivers' time in getting the kids to school.
And also, when you start adding new schools onto routes, that makes routes longer, right?
It does. And then how do you do that? Do you bring all the kids in from the community and sort them at a building? Or do you run different buses through the community and try to pick them up at, you know, sort them at their house instead of sorting them at a hub or a location? But what the problem is when you bring all the kids into school, the non-public students need to be supervised during these bus transfers. All buildings are short-staffed. We're short-staffed on aides. We're short-staffed in administration. We're trying to do more and more with and try to make the dollars in school funding stretch. And so this becomes a real situation where it's not just one thing, it's many things put together.
I've heard the idea of maybe a hub and spoke system where you bring kids to one building and then you send them out to different areas, but that potentially means longer time on buses for kids, right? And more staff to make sure that kids are all getting where they want to go,
So
where they need to
the
go.
ride time is about the same, but parents and community and some teachers really don't like the idea that kids are switching buses and not going directly once the teacher puts the child on a bus and that bus goes to a hub, that teacher doesn't feel comfortable that that child is able to navigate getting to their bus to go home on. And so there's a lot of anxiety around children switching buses. I ran a district that did that, but I will tell you that children catch on very quickly. Within 5 or 6 days, they're looking for their friends. They're not looking for the bus numbers anymore. They're looking for their friends. They know how to get to where they're going. And then there are the non-public students, parents who feel like, well, I don't want my children riding with the public students, but yet they live in the same community. And so I don't understand. I just don't think that I don't think that we have a lot of understanding from the practice side on how this all really can work and how it does work.
Have you and other school transportation officials, people who have expertise in this area, have you shared information about the school bus driver shortage that you're seeing with state lawmakers?
We have, yes, but I'm not sure that they understand. I'm not sure that they have a full understanding of what that driver shortage is. It's not just the number of drivers, it's the number of drivers available. So if you have someone go off on FMLA or a long illness, you have to have a substitute to keep that route running. And like I said, the substitute driver pool, that dried up in 2018 and 2019. And now we've got mechanics and we've got maintenance staff, we've got custodial staff, we have secretaries. Though they all had a job for a reason too. So everybody gets, you know, really anxious about, well, I don't have time to do my own work now because I'm driving bus for 4 hours a day. I'm filling this. And so there is a large human cost in school systems to having not enough drivers also.
There's been a suggestion that districts are not managing their resources wisely. each district gets $1,500 per child for transportation, but you've got at least one district that has been offering cash payments of between $600 and $1,200 to transport for families to transport their own children. That's less than what they're getting from the state. Are districts managing that money wisely?
So if you look at the funding flow from the state, the funding flow from the state says, we're going to pay you on either ridership or miles for regular ed transportation. And then they give you a minimum of 48 or 45.83% this year. So you get less than half of what it actually costs to transport the child. So the children that are deemed impractical, there's no payment at all to the school districts for there used to be, when the minimum was $250 for payment in lieu of transportation, the state reimbursed the districts $187 of that. So there was funding from the state to the school to the parents. Well, now the state has eliminated that payment for payment in lieu of, so the whole payment is for the district. There is no funding flow for that student that doesn't ride a bus. In fact, last week was count week. They did a count. They counted the students and the miles, and whatever the highest cost was, that's what the state would reimburse off of either state share or the 45.83%.
And I've heard superintendents say that the state has never fully made districts whole in terms of paying for those transportation costs. That you've estimated to me that going back to 2009, districts have been forced to absorb approximately $1.68 billion in capital costs. Can you explain that?
Well, previously, the state always funded bus purchases. In fact, at one time, the state would buy a school district a bus if they were going to operate that for non-public use. So if you had a route that the school was running for the non-public students, the state would buy that district a bus to operate. Well, that all of the bus funding went away in 2009. So the districts have 100% had this capital cost placed on them, no matter what the bus is being used for. So, and there's no funding reimbursement for that bus. And so if you were running a business and you bought a piece of machinery, you could deduct the depreciation, you could deduct the loss of value from your profit. And then, that was looked at as a cost of business. But there's no depreciation schedule. There is nothing available for districts to use to increase funding or to increase the cost of transporting a student to be reimbursed at the same percentage. Kentucky does. Pennsylvania does. They have a depreciation schedule that's factored into the cost of the transportation of the students, and that is a funding flow back to the districts based on 7% or 8% or 5%, whatever they determine the loss of value of that bus is for each year.
So all this comes back on districts that are just trying to get all students that they are required to transport safely to where they're required to transport them to. I want to ask you, there's been the suggestion the state could pay private or non-public schools or somebody else directly to provide transportation, removing public schools from the transportation equation. Is that something that school transportation officials that would support? Is there a downside to that?
So school transportation officials absolutely would support that. In fact, I've been working with a large school district, and they are helping two of the non-public schools that are doing transportation. They're doing all they can to help them be successful with their own transportation. There's a lot of laws, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations, and I'm open to helping non-public schools too if they need help. Understanding all of the compliance issues for drivers, all of the compliance issues for school buses. That's one of the reasons why I retired early from OSBA is I want to help school districts, no matter whether it's private, public, or community, get children on the school buses. I think that's really important.
Do you think the days of expecting a full-time bus driver to take your student from your home to the school and back home, are those really dramatically changing, or is that a realistic expectation for a parent in a school district, whether they're sending their kid to a charter school or they're using a voucher, they're going to public school, whatever?
I think those days are really good old days. And I think the new situation that we're in is that school districts will have to stretch resources, will have to be flexible with what they can do. One community might be bused differently than another community. One community might be direct routed, another community might be hub and spoke, even in the same school district, even in the, even if the school boundaries touch each other. I think having one solution for every district and every section of the district, I think that's gone by the wayside.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
So in the last 8 years, the cost per child of depreciation has gone from, well, if you go back to 2009, it was $53 a student. You go, and then you go forward and then just go back 8 years from today. So 2017, it was about $80 a student. Right now, we're at $166 a student of cost of depreciation of the school bus. And that's the riders. That's not every student in the building. That's the riderships. So the other thing is we used to transport nearly 1 million students. We're down to transporting only about 720,000 now. So, and our state hasn't lost that much as far as population. So that tells a story that districts are eliminating riders, which means children have different ways to get to school that aren't as safe as a school bus.
But with fewer students to transport, you still have a school bus driver shortage?
Yes, because you still have the time and distance to cover. That's the hard part. You think that, well, if you're not transporting as many students, but you still have every square mile in the state to cover. I mean, it's I like to tease my supervisors that I deal with, and I always say it's not rocket science, but it is all time and space.
Republican Senator Andrew Brenner, who chairs the Senate Education Committee, told me he's talked to superintendents who would prefer another transportation option, and perhaps county-wide systems would work better. But he said there would have to be a major public discussion on this, and whatever might result would be phased in over a few years.